welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Before I get going again today, I want to say thank you to a lot of the community members that have been reaching out, posing and sending me some questions. Today, this show is going to be based on a community member's inquiry to me, and I want to let that person know thank you. The question is actually quite important, and I've really actually never spoken about it before. So I thought it was going to be something that was going to make a really good show. I also want to say, this is the first time you're listening to me. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, rate me 5 stars here on Spotify. It helps me spread the message, keep the show going. If you're so inclined, there is also a donation link inside of the profile description of my show. Any small donations, large or big or small, are always helpful. I want to say thank you to a couple who have that were okay with me mentioning their names. So Amy K out of the UK, thank you so very much. And the couple out of the Northern United States, I appreciate it very much. All of your help keeps me doing the show, moving it forward, and for the most part, keeping it ad-free for all of you in the community. So today, I want to start talking about this question that I got. It really does deserve some introspection here. It's a little bit about engaging with things we see or the explicit content on social media that we come across. Although I'm more referencing places like fetish.com or alt.com or even FetLife, there are other obvious platforms that people do go to discuss BDSM, the lifestyle, even places like Reddit. Now, in our community, it's characterized by its commitment to openness and understanding, but it is imperative for us to scrutinize how some of these interactions do shape our psychological landscape as we view them and interact with them. Now, as I kind of go through this today, we're going to really start to look at the complex dimensions of human sexuality and psychology, because understanding this was going to give us a little bit more introspection to this topic. So if we're really starting to look at all the things that we encounter, the extreme graphic nudity, the sexuality, even the extreme setup photos of BDSM imagery or suspensions or even some of the artwork, how does this affect us inside of the community? And when I received this, I kind of sat with this question for a while because I thought, that's really good. We look at some of these things, I think when we first get into a platform like Reddit or maybe even 4chan where some things are more extreme, or we get onto FetLife where some of the photos or some of the videos are a little bit more curated and kind of set up to further what else somebody's doing. Not including all of the airbrushing or the AI that goes along with it, or the thousands of ring lights that people are using to set up the perfect shot. I think part of this, I have 6 points I want to cover today. It really does have some sort of a effect on what we're seeing and what we're believing actually happens in the lifestyle. And I actually covered this a while ago. I think it may have been season 2, but I did kind of the fantasy versus reality inside of the lifestyle and what we see. But this is going to be a little bit more psychological on the insights. So the first thing I want to kind of go over today is desensitization, right? Regular exposure to explicit imagery really does, especially if that's full of nudity or impact marks, it initiates really a complex psychological process known as desensitization. Now, people might become more heightened or may experience more heightened emotional responses to such stimuli. Now, over time, and especially with repeated exposure, these responses tend to diminish. This phenomenon occurs as the brain adapts to this familiar stimulus, requiring more intense or novel content to provoke similar levels of emotional arousal. Psychologically, desensitization can be understood through mechanisms like habituation or sensory adaptation. Habituation refers to the brain's tendency to become less responsive to stimulus that are frequently encountered, whereas Sensory adaptation here involves a decrease in sensory perception, and over time, especially due to consistent exposure of some of this more explicit content that we see, whether it's sexual in nature or it's more graphic, or whatever the case may be. And in the context of explicit content, these mechanisms really do contribute to a gradual decrease in emotional reactivity to what we're seeing, and it does alter how we perceive and respond to certain sexual imagery. Now, importantly, these implications of desensitization extend beyond immediate emotional responses. They do influence our arousal patterns, they shape what we find stimulating or erotic. As this process continues, individuals might seek more extreme or unconventional content to elicit that same desired emotional or physiological response. This escalation can lead to a cycle where continual exposure does mean that increasingly explicit material can be needed to maintain arousal. Now, it's not always, but this does potentially impact our interpersonal relationships and our self perception here. Now, as we navigate desensitization, it does require a lot of mindfulness and self awareness. It involves recognizing how repeated exposure shapes our emotional responsiveness to things and our sexual preferences. For some, this may enhance their ability to explore the diverse aspects of sexuality with openness and curiosity. But it is important to remember and monitor these dynamics to ensure that personal boundaries and ethical considerations remain intact. And this means we have to maintain sensitivity to our emotional cues while we are respecting our own personal limits and promoting healthy sexual exploration within the context of informed consent and, of course, mutual respect. The next part that comes in here is the normalization. Now, frequent exposure to all of this explicit consent does play a significant role in its normalization within online communities and our personal perspectives. Initially perceived as taboo or extreme, and that's how probably the majority of the world views what we do inside of the lifestyle to be, explicit content gradually assimilates it into our everyday perceptions, where what was once unconventional becomes commonplace or even desirable. Now, this normalization process shapes how individuals perceive or interpret and engage with their own desires, relationships, and their boundaries. Psychologically here, normalization operates through the process such as social learning or cognitive schema development. Social learning theory suggests that individuals learn behaviors and norms through observation and imitation, especially within social contexts like our online communities. Now, an explicit amount or explicit content becomes more prevalent and accepted within these communities. It influences individuals' perceptions of what is acceptable or desirable in expression. Now, this is a key thing here that I'm talking about because, as the debate has raged over the years about commentary when we make social media posts, whether they are videos or graphic imagery, and then the responses we receive, well, the problem, it's a twofold problem. Yes, while we would like everybody to act in a respectful manner, and unfortunately it is the internet, and there are going to be people saying what's coming straight off the top of their minds or saying things that you shouldn't. And while we all might agree that shouldn't be the case, the reality is that when we are offering or putting up this content that's there, especially in a sexually charged atmosphere, what we are actually doing is we are also, in part, fostering this behavior to continue. If I see 1,000 images of similar things, all saying, please use me in one way, or this is what I like, or how would you like to do this to me? And then we come across something else. By the time we've gotten to the 1001, the behavioral pattern is going to be shaped. Now, I don't excuse behavior, I'm explaining it. I don't do that when I work with my clients. I don't excuse anything anybody does. I help understanding. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is help us understand why some of this is even happening in our online communities. So if we understand that, maybe we can understand why some of these things happen. But there are mechanisms now in our control that we can enact to stop some of these behaviors, not alone banning people or deleting comments are now on places like FetLife, where you can set comments to your friends or followers only. Now, whether or not people choose to enact that, that's going to be on them. Their own personal responsibility does come into play, but a lot of times many don't like to do that, because then if they create a post complaining about the negative attention they're receiving, this draws more attention to them and the cycle continues. But moving forward, because this is not about that today. So, cognitive schema, when I mentioned that before, this development refers to the mental frameworks through which individuals interpret and organize the information inside of their mind. Now, exposure to normalized explicit content can reshape these schemas. It influences attitudes towards sexuality, intimacy, and personal boundaries. This evolution in cognitive schemas here may lead individuals to reassess their own desires, behaviors, and potentially aligning with the community norms, or diverging based on one person's their own self-reflection or their critical self-awareness. Balancing the exploration within critical self-reflection is essential when you're navigating this, especially when it comes to the normalization of explicit content. Now, while the exploration here fosters an understanding and personal growth, critical reflection here encourages people to assess how normalized attitudes and behaviors align with their personal values and ethical considerations. This introspective process helps maintain really a healthy alignment between personal desires and community norms, and it promotes authenticity and informed decision making in our sexual expression. Now, by acknowledging the whole psychological mechanism behind normalization and engaging in thoughtful reflection, people can really navigate the complexities of explicit content with greater awareness and integrity. And if they start to realize it's affecting them in one way or another, have the ability to maybe engage or disengage from said content. But this approach really does support a dynamic exploration of sexuality while respecting personal boundaries and promoting a culture of consent, which we know is essential inside of the lifestyle, and mutual respect within our community, which should go without saying. But in this next part here, I really want to get into the impact on our emotions when we're looking at these things. Now, when we engage with this explicit content, this can trigger diverse spectrum of emotional responses inside of certain people, and it can be deeply influenced by individuals' personal histories, their current circumstances, and their underlying psychological predispositions. For some, exposure may evoke feelings of excitement or curiosity, validation of personal desires, a sense of jealousy. Maybe they want to have some sort of affirmation within their own sexual identity. Conversely, some others might confront emotions such as guilt, shame, maybe confusion that stem from these societal norms or their personal values or their own internal conflicts. Psychologically, these emotions create this whole complex interaction between cognitive processing, emotional regulation, and self perception. Now, cognitive processing involves how we interpret and make sense of the content that we encounter, and that's influenced by our personal beliefs and our societal conditioning. Now, our emotional regulation refers to the strategies that we employ to manage and cope with our emotional responses, which can vary in effectiveness depending on individual resilience and our support networks. Our self perception and our interpersonal dynamics are significantly shaped by these emotional responses. Positive emotional experience may enhance self esteem and confidence, and that does really generate and foster healthier interpersonal relationships and a more positive outlook on sexuality. However, negative emotions such as shame, guilt, these can impact our self image and lead us to internal conflicts or strained interpersonal connections. Now, the importance here of emotional awareness and self compassion can't be overstated, especially when we're navigating this terrain of inside of the lifestyle and our online interactions, where a lot of these things are being thrown right at us. If you make one or two clicks once you're navigating some social media sites, all of a sudden you can be exposed to very graphic content and you may not be prepared for what you're going to see. So if you practice a little bit of self-compassion, treat yourself with a little bit of kindness and understanding during these moments of maybe a little bit of emotional vulnerability or a little bit of emotional stress, conversely, you might be able to navigate these a little bit better. And more so, I might even suggest talking to someone after that. And I really do have something that when I was thinking about this and I was writing back to this individual that I didn't get a chance to share with them, but I think I've shared it on the show a couple of times. I remember my first dungeon experience, which was at 1763 in Atlanta, which is now closed. Loved that place, was a wonderful dungeon. While I spent time in Atlanta, and God, it seems like forever ago, I was there quite a few times, but I remember the first time that I ever went, and that weekend, what I found was so interesting, and besides the fact that everybody there was lovely and welcoming, and I met and interacted with a lot of people, there were so many demonstrations going on. And what I found for me was such an impactful visual and emotional overload that I couldn't process everything while I was there. I visually was there and I was, physically there, but my mind was racing with the impact scenes or the needle play that was being done with the sub that then had a silk corset tied with string around them, or the electric wand that I remember going on, or some of the rope tying. I remember all of this and I remember how I felt and how much it impacted me. And that's okay because it is a lot to process when you first enter a club. I felt similar when I was in New York visiting my mentor at the time, and we went to a dungeon there, and we were witnessing some scenes and how I felt about the impact play. All of these things, I had a really good support network in place, and I was able to talk to people that were close to me about what I experienced, how I felt, and even help me understand and process my own emotions as I was going through at that time. Years later, as I've been through the lifestyle now, it's been easier for me to process these things. I think there are still things for me that are always going to be new and exciting. So sometimes after a big scene with somebody that I've never possibly seen before or seen done differently, I definitely unpack that or talk it over with people that are inside of my inner circle. And we really have these conversations to understand these things and get them out there. And this kind of leads me to this next part, which is the whole unconscious influence here. Now, the repeated exposure to these explicit themes exerts a profound influence on the unconscious mind. And it does permeate into our dreams, our fantasies, and our subconscious desires that often diverge from conscious intentions. Now, this phenomenon reflects the intricate interplay between conscious awareness and unconscious processes, where implicit associations and latent desires shape individual experiences of our sexual exploration and our identity. Our identity. Now, psychologically, the unconscious mind does process and integrate information outside of our conscious awareness. And drawing from personal experiences, this ends up building on it, especially when you add in our cultural influences and our innate predispositions. Exposure to this type of explicit content can introduce new themes and scenarios into our unconscious realm. It influences our dreams that reflect possibly our suppressed desires or unexplored aspects of our own sexuality. Fantasies here, likewise, serve really as a gateway to understanding our deeper psychological currents, and they do provide a safe space for us to explore our taboo or even our unconventional desires that we may not even know that were locked away inside of us. And this offers insight into this personal motivation and fantasies that may not align with conscious beliefs or our societal norms. Now, by exploring some of these fantasies with mindfulness or curiosity, people can deepen their self-understanding and cultivate a really more authentic relationship with their own sexual identity. Navigating this unconscious influence does require a balanced approach, though, of introspection and self-awareness, and that's something I mentioned before. it does involve recognizing the potential impact here of explicit content on our unconscious, especially as we process that while maintaining agency and the ethical consideration in sexual exploration. Integrating these insights fosters a greater sense of alignment between the conscious intentions of what we want and our unconscious desires. This promotes a more integrated and fulfilling sexual experience. And we see this with people time and time again inside of the lifestyle. So when I say that, what do I mean? Well, what I mean by this is that we get involved in the lifestyle, we hopefully meet somebody we connect with, and there's things that if we're often negotiating every 4 or 6 or 8 weeks, however often you're renegotiating your dynamic, those things that maybe we once said were softer limits, we might wash away because the person we're with, we want to start exploring, pardon me, or harder limits all of a sudden because we really trust and are in love with somebody, we really want to explore and we really want to try. There was this one couple I can think of directly that when they met, they really both had these very stringent limits of, so for example, like no needle play, no water sports, or even some more extreme BDSM fetishes that are on the darker side, I guess you could consider it, of the spectrum. But over time, as the relationship grew over years, the dynamic trust between them pushed them into these darker areas. Nothing illegal, by the way, but getting involved with waterboarding or, harder or more stringent aspects of breath play, scat, extreme rope bondage, things of this nature. And it was this incredible push inside of their own sexual desires and fantasies that motivated them to keep going deeper and deeper. Now, subsequently, that is okay. There is room for everybody inside of this lifestyle to explore and do what they like. I'm not kink shaming anybody. You do what you do as long as it's safe, sane, and consensual. I'm going to add in also legal. But beyond all of that, I think that's part of why most of us are here, because it's something that sits in the darkest recesses of our mind, and then from there, we want to explore it in real time. And this allows us to move into this next part, which is where I talk about comparison and our self-esteem. Now, when we engage with curated or idealized representations that are prevalent in explicit content, it often fosters comparisons that can significantly impact self-esteem or our own body image. Now, this phenomenon is heightened in the environments where individuals present really polished versions of themselves or participate in activities that emphasize physical alterations or endurance. And we see this in places like FetLife or Reddit or even on alt.com, where all of these perfectly crafted photos or images, you can definitely discern some of the real images from the ones that have been set up to show more carefully curated posts or pictures. But what this does for us is it creates this phenomenon and heightened in environments where individuals present these things of themselves or participate in activities that emphasize all of these things. But the pervasive nature of these comparisons underscores the importance of fostering resilience and promoting healthy self-perception within our personal and interpersonal contexts. Psychologically, these comparisons stem from innate tendencies to evaluate ourselves against perceived standards or ideas. Now, exposure to idealized images and narratives and explicit content does distort perceptions of our normalcy and our desirability. If we don't look a certain way, if we don't act a certain way, or moan a certain way, whatever the case may be, or respond to a spanking in a certain way, this does lead us into certain unrealistic expectations here about our own body or our own reactions or maybe our own sexual performance or identity. And these comparisons may exacerbate the feelings we have of inadequacy or dissatisfaction, and this influences our overall self-esteem and our emotional well-being. Now, cultivating resilience against these unrealistic comparisons begins by doing some self-acceptance and being real and authentic with ourselves. And if we embrace our own unique attributes and qualities while acknowledging individual limitations, this promotes a more grounded sense of self-worth and identity that is not derived from making that self-worth or identity by things that we see that we believe we should emulate. It involves recognizing that curated representations in explicit content often don't really reflect the full spectrum of a human diversity or experience, or ultimately what's really transpired. It's usually the after effect or before with very limited during. Moreover, if we establish these healthy boundaries in personal and interpersonal interactions, this becomes ultimately crucial. If we set realistic expectations and boundaries around the engagement with some of this content, this allows us to navigate these environments with greater self-assurance or integrity. It encourages mindful consumption of what we see, and it does promote a culture of consent and mutual respect, not only with the community at large, but even with ourselves. And if we really do support people in developing a positive self-image and healthy self-esteem by promoting some of these self-care practices and affirming our personal strength, what we are doing here is ultimately, what we're doing is we allow people to practice self-compassion and seek support from trusted peers or even professionals that can aid in reframing these negative comparisons that allows people to build a more compassionate relationship with themselves. And this gives me or leads me to my final point, which is the contextual understanding here of what we are engaging with. Now, if we understand the broader context and personal motivations behind engaging with some of this explicit content, it really becomes essential for fostering these meaningful interactions when we are online. Now, for a lot of people, explicit content serves as a mean for maybe education, exploration, self-discovery is a good way of saying it, or for some, masturbatory aids, right? Even a sense of community connection within the realm of sexual expression. Now, if we embrace a nuanced understanding of our boundaries and our intentions and the ethical considerations that promotes fulfilling engagements within our online communities, we understand how we can start to digest some of this in a healthy way. Now, psychologically, engaging with explicit content can serve various purposes beyond the mere stimulation. It can facilitate sexual exploration, our development, our offering insights into what our desires, our preferences, our boundaries, our fantasies. And then for some, it gives a platform for learning about the diverse sexual practices and relationships. And it does really create an environment that's inclusive and informed on our perception of human sexuality. Recognizing the diversity of motivations behind engaging with explicit content does help mitigate the potential misunderstandings and promotes a little bit of a deeper understanding within the community. It involves respecting people's choices, their boundaries, while acknowledging the ethical considerations that are involved, especially in content creation, distribution, and even how we consume it. And this mindful approach does encourage open dialogue with a modicum of respect and, culture of consent and authenticity when we are in these places. Now, that's a little bit more idealistic, and I get that because it is the internet, but, one can still hope. Now, contextual understanding does encourage critical reflection on the impact of explicit consent on our personal beliefs and our attitudes toward sexuality. And if we examine the social, cultural, and psychological factors that shape all of our engagement with explicit content, we really can navigate these environments with a greater awareness and integrity for ourselves. Now, this process supports informed decision making and promotes a more ethical and responsible approach to sexual expression. Whether or not people are going to actually do that, that's going to be the different story. I don't monitor, or if anybody's over the age of 18 or whatever the legal age is considered adult for every country around the world, what you do and what you consume, just bear in mind, is going to shape your life and what we think and how we move it forward. It's not that easy, but it is clear for one thing here, and I'm going to kind of wrap this all up here in my final thoughts. These interactions are far from simple or one-dimensional. Everything I've talked about or looked at here, from desensitization to normalization to the complexities of the emotional impact, the unconscious influences, the comparison, self-esteem, These all reveal the vast range of the human experience and our psychological processes that we go through. Now, at the heart of this lies one fundamental truth. Our interactions with explicit content are deeply personal, and they're not one-dimensional. They reflect not only our individual desires and our curiosities, but also our broader societal and cultural context. If we understand these dynamics, we know that they require introspection on our behalf, empathy, and most of all, some critical awareness. Sorry, guys, I'm a little froggy today, battling something off, so apologize for coughing kind of throughout the show here. Now, I've tried to highlight the importance here of mindfulness in navigating all these things, but it does allow us to observe our emotional responses. It questions our motivations and assesses how these interactions shape our sense of self and our relationships with others. It does encourage us to cultivate compassion amidst moments of vulnerability and our approach to how we explore things inside of this lifestyle. Now, I want to keep these conversations going forward because I believe this question was incredibly important when this person reached out to me. And I appreciate this person for sending this to me because it's really allowed me to create this specifically for, I think, a subject that we automatically overlook. And so I'm going to pose a question to you all today. I'm going to put it up on Spotify. I'll also put it on my social media on FetLife. If you were to understand, or how has really engaging in some of this explicit content on platforms like FetLife or Reddit or 4chan or alt.com or any of the other places you can, how has it influenced your perceptions of sexual desire and intimacy? What's it done to you? I think it's a real good question because I think the more we see these things and we start craving these desires, a lot of times our desires, our fantasies don't match reality. And I think this leads to a lot of times we feel let down. So I think it's really an important thing to move forward. I'm going to put this question up there for you all. I want to let you know, for some, if this is the first time you're listening to me, I do have a book out on the lifestyle. It's called Tangled Desires, the exploration between, or the intersection between psychology and BDSM. Wherever you get books, you can get them. There's an e-version if you prefer that for quicker reading, or there is a print version available now. You can have it shipped out to you. Also, I do have a new podcast. It's on true crime. It's called BDSM, Blood, Death, Sex, and Magic. It is based around true crime that connects with the BDSM lifestyle. So things that have happened. My first case I'm going over actually completely intersects with one of our larger social media platforms. So it's interesting. You can check that out on Spotify as well. But I'm really curious. I'd like to hear everybody's thoughts on what they think about this, and has it affected you? Do you feel a little bit desensitized when you look at some of these things? Do you still find them erotic? Let me know in the comment sections below. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay clean.